The wind howled across the empty prairie, slipping through Caroline's thin, worn coat like a cold blade cutting into her skin. She knelt beside the small grave she had dug with her bare hands, the ground hard as stone, dried blood clinging to her fingertips. Tears slid down her cheeks but froze before they could fall, heavy and numbing. Beneath the frozen earth lay Elijah, the man who had once dreamed with her of a new life in the West, now wrapped only in the quilt she had sewn for their wedding day. "Mama." A trembling voice came from behind her. Caroline turned to see her eldest daughter clutching her younger brother, their young faces filled with confusion and fear. She swallowed her pain, stood up, and brushed the dirt from her skirt. "I'm here," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I'm just saying goodbye to Papa." The children were pale from cold and hunger. In that moment, Caroline understood that she no longer had the right to collapse. Elijah was gone, taking with him the last pillar of their family. Ahead of her was not only a frozen prairie, but a ruthless future one in which the survival of her children and her own depended entirely on her endurance and resolve. Caroline knelt in front of her children, her freezing hands cupping their small, trembling faces. She looked straight into her daughter's eyes, forcing herself to stay strong even as her heart lay in pieces. "We will survive," she said slowly, as if carving the promise into herself. "I promise." They left the grave as the faint light of afternoon faded away, pulling the broken wagon and whatever remained of their unfinished journey. Their shelter was nothing more than splintered boards from a shattered wheel and a few torn tarps stretched into shape fragile against the raging wind. Caroline gathered the old ashes, patiently breathing life into them until a weak flame flickered back to life. She rubbed her son's tiny hands, blowing warmth onto his purpled fingers, while her daughter sat close beside them, silently watching as darkness crept across the prairie. Night fell quickly, bringing a heavy silence and unfamiliar sounds that tightened Caroline's chest. When the children finally drifted into sleep from exhaustion and hunger, Caroline remained awake, her back against the canvas wall, her eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Fear was still there, but deep within her, a clear resolve had taken shape. No matter the cold, the night, or whatever dangers lay ahead, she would stand firm, not for herself, but for the two lives that placed their entire trust in her. In the depths of the night, as the wind shrieked in violent bursts, threatening to tear the fragile shelter apart, Caroline jolted awake at a strange sound. It wasn't an animal, and it didn't resemble the wind battering the canvas. It was the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her hand instantly reached for Elijah's old hunting knife, the blade icy cold, yet familiar. Caroline slipped quietly out of the shelter, each step careful on the thin layer of snow. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling but unyielding. Ahead of her, a tall figure emerged from the darkness, standing motionless, as if it were part of the prairie itself. There was no reply. The figure bent down, placed something on the ground, then stepped back a few paces. In that taut moment, Caroline braced herself for the worst. But the stranger turned away and vanished into the darkness so swiftly and silently that she wondered whether she had truly seen anyone at all. When the silence returned, she moved forward, her pulse still racing. At her feet lay a small bundle, dried meat, a few sprigs of herbs, and a water skin that was still warm. Caroline stood frozen, confusion and gratitude swelling in her chest until it nearly stole her breath. She lifted her gaze toward the darkness where the stranger had disappeared and whispered, "Thank you." Whether the words were heard or not, for the first time that winter, a fragile spark of hope took root in her heart. The next morning, Caroline stepped out of the shelter into the pale light of early dawn, her mind still unsettled by what had happened the night before. On the thin layer of snow surrounding the camp, she noticed unfamiliar footprints, steady, deliberate steps forming a loose circle around the shelter, as if someone had stood watch through the night. They showed no sign of haste or secrecy. Instead, they were calm and methodical, leaving Caroline both wary and strangely reassured. The days that followed passed in a tense silence. Each night, when darkness swallowed the prairie, food and water appeared once more outside the shelter, always just enough, never too much. The stranger never spoke, never came closer than necessary. Caroline slowly grew accustomed to the unseen presence, though she never fully let her guard down. One evening, As the setting sun washed the sky in pale violet, Caroline caught her first clear glimpse of him. He stood at the edge of the forest, tall, broad-shouldered, with long black hair braided down his back. His eyes were calm but sharp, constantly scanning the surroundings before finally settling on her. "Who are you?" Caroline asked, her voice low but steady. The man did not answer. He only gave a slight nod, as if acknowledging his own existence, then turned and quietly disappeared into the deepening shadows of the trees. Caroline remained still for a long moment, keenly aware that in this unforgiving land, she and her children were no longer entirely alone. On a bitterly cold morning, Carolyn left the camp before dawn, carrying her old rifle and a fragile hope of finding food. Fresh snow had blurred every trail, making each step heavy and slow. When she finally brought down a small animal and turned back, a sudden sense of dread clenched her chest. A thin plume of smoke rose from the direction of the camp, too steady, too deliberate to be an accident. She dropped everything and ran, her heart pounding in time with her footsteps. When she reached the edge of the camp, the sight before her made her blood run cold. Two rough-looking men stood beside the fire, their eyes greedy and cruel. Her daughter was trapped in one man's grip, a knife pressed against her fragile throat. Her young son lay motionless on the frozen ground, utterly still. "Let her go!" Caroline screamed, raising her rifle in desperation. "Put the gun down, or she dies!" The taller man snarled, tightening his hold on the blade. Caroline's hands trembled. She lowered the rifle inch by inch, the weight of helplessness crushing the air from her lungs. In that moment, she understood that the greatest danger was not the prairie's cold or hunger, but people themselves. And if nothing changed, every struggle she had made to survive could end right here on the land she had once believed would be the beginning of a new life. Just as Caroline felt all hope slipping away, a flicker of movement at the edge of the forest changed the air. From the shadows, Tokala burst forth, fast and silent like a wolf. In a heartbeat, he struck the man holding the knife, a clean, brutal blow that sent him screaming in pain and releasing the child. Caroline's daughter collapsed to her knees, then scrambled toward her mother, sobbing as she was pulled into trembling arms. Tokala gave the second man no chance to react. He moved with fluid precision, forcing his opponent back step by step. Caroline instantly grabbed her rifle, fear transforming into pure survival instinct. When the second man charged, axe raised high, she pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked across the prairie, and he fell into the snow. Silence crashed down, heavy and absolute. Tokala stood there, breathing hard, blood seeping from a wound on his arm. Caroline rushed to him, fear and gratitude twisting together in her chest. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her voice breaking. Tokala shook his head slightly, his sharp gaze still sweeping the surroundings. "We can't stay here," he said shortly. "Others will come." They didn't waste a second. Grabbing whatever they could still use, lifting the child into their arms, they fled. Caroline glanced back one last time at the ruined shelter, knowing that from this moment on, her path to survival had taken a different turn. And the man who had once been nothing more than a shadow in the night had now become an indispensable ally. Tokala led them away from the camp in silence, guiding them through the deep forest as the fading light of evening slipped away. His movements were sure and deliberate, choosing narrow, hidden paths Caroline had never noticed, as if this land had long been etched into his memory. At last, they reached a small rock cave concealed behind dense pine branches, deep enough to block the wind and hidden enough to escape watchful eyes. Inside the cave, the air was noticeably warmer. Tokala laid the child down, quickly checking his condition before taking out several dried sprigs of herbs. His movements were steady and practiced, far removed from the haste of someone who knew only how to fight. Caroline sat close by, holding her breath with every motion, until she saw her son's breathing slowly even out. "He'll live," Tokala said simply, the words firm and reassuring. Caroline lowered her head, tears finally spilling not from grief, but from relief. As night settled over the forest, Tokala looked directly at her. "They'll come back. Next time, there will be more of them." Caroline clenched her hands, feeling the familiar surge of fear rise again, but this time, it didn't make her falter. "I won't run anymore," she said, her voice low and resolute. Tokala nodded, a glint of respect in his eyes. Then we must learn how to fight and how to survive better. Working doesn't of nighty. In the darkness of the cave, balanced between fear and determination, a quiet transformation began to take shape within Caroline. The rumors of Caroline's weakness were no longer true, but the greedy men still returned this time armed with guns and intent on taking the land she clung to for survival. That morning, when the sound of hooves echoed at the forest's edge, Caroline was already standing at the doorway, her rifle steady in her hands. Fear was still there, but it had been forged into a cold, controlled calm. The leader stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt, demanding that she surrender the land and leave. Caroline did not move. She met his gaze, her words firm and unyielding. "This is my home. You have no claim here." Behind her, Tokala appeared silent, but enough to make the men hesitate. When the first shot rang out, everything unfolded in a blur. Caroline fired back with precision, every shot deliberate. Tokala moved like a shadow, striking from angles no one anticipated. They didn't shield each other with shouted commands, but with an unspoken understanding forged through days of shared survival. The confrontation ended when the leader was forced to retreat, blood and fear plain on his face. Caroline remained standing as the smoke slowly cleared, knowing that this time she had defended more than land. She had claimed her right to live, to choose, and to never be driven away again. When the gunfire finally faded, the prairie fell into a heavy silence. The invaders were not all dead, but they no longer dared to advance. They pulled back together, their eyes filled with hatred tempered by fear, understanding that this place was no longer an easy target. Caroline remained still, her rifle in hand, until the last figure disappeared beyond the trees. She felt no triumph, only a deep relief, as if a burden that had pressed on her chest for months had finally been lifted. Tokala stepped to her side, silently scanning the surroundings to ensure the danger had passed. He offered no praise, no congratulations, just a quiet nod, the clearest form of acknowledgement. The children emerged from their hiding place, moving slowly at first before breaking into a run toward their mother. Caroline dropped to her knees and held them tight, feeling the real warmth of life in her arms. She knew this victory had not come from brute strength alone, but from the choice not to submit. From that moment on, Caroline was no longer someone merely struggling to survive each day. She had risen, defending her land, her family, and her dignity. The conflict ended not in slaughter, but with a clear message. She and her children would not be driven away again. Winter finally retreated, leaving behind melting snow and ground slowly coming back to life. Warm sunlight stretched across the prairie, a place that had once known only cold winds and fear. Caroline stood before the newly built house, sturdier now, no longer a temporary shelter but a true home. Her hands were rough from labor, yet her eyes no longer looked lost. The children ran and played across the grassland, their clear laughter ringing through the open space. They were children again, not merely survivors, shaped by fear. Caroline watched in silence, her heart filled with pride and gratitude. Tokala stayed, not as a savior, but as a natural part of this new life. He helped build the house, hunted, repaired fences, and most importantly respected Caroline's choices. Between them, there were no grand promises, only trust slowly forming through each rare, peaceful day. One evening, as the sky was washed in a gentle golden light, Caroline understood that the pain of the past no longer held her captive. She had lost, she had been afraid, but she had also learned how to stand her ground. Before her now lay not a harsh prairie, but a new horizon, one where hope was no longer fragile, but firmly rooted, ready to grow alongside them.